Awake, Arise, The Life of Swami Vivekanand. Written, narrated and published by SweetAudible. Preface. Step into the life of Swami Vivekananda. Imagine someone in just 39 short years shakes the world with his words, his courage and his vision. Swami Vivekananda was that extraordinary soul. Born as Narendra Datta in a simple household in Kolkata, he transformed himself into a beacon of strength, service and spiritual wisdom. As a disciple of Sri Ramakrishna Paramhansa, he not only awakened India, but with his unforgettable greeting, "My American sisters and brothers," at the World Parliament of Religions in Chicago, placed India's name proudly on the global map. His life shows us that true religion isn't confined to temples. It is alive in feeding the hungry, comforting the suffering, and uplifting humanity. His timeless call resonates even today. Arise, awake, and stop not until the goal is reached. This biography invites you to journey through his incredible life, his struggles, his unwavering courage, and his enduring message that continues to inspire millions around the world. Let us dive into his life journey. Chapter 1. The Divine Birth. On a winter morning, when the holy Ganges flowed quietly through Calcutta and the bells of ancient temples echoed across the city, a child was born who would later shake the spiritual conscience of the world. It was January 12, 1863, just a few days after India had celebrated the festival of Makar Sankranti. This child was named Narendra Datta, who in time would become known to the world as Swami Vivekananda. Narendra was born into a well-respected family of the Kayastha caste. His father, Vishwanath Datta, was a successful attorney at the Calcutta High Court. He was a man of progressive outlook, sharp intellect, and independent thinking. He read widely, not only in law but also in philosophy, literature, and science. His open mind and questioning spirit would pass on to his son. Narendra's mother, Bhuvaneshwari Devi, was of a deeply religious temperament. She was gentle, pure, and filled with devotion to God. Before the birth of her son, she had prayed earnestly for a child who would be strong in character and serve humanity. One night, she dreamt of Lord Shiva and felt assured that a divine child would soon come into her life. When Narendra was born, she considered him a blessing from the great Lord. From his earliest days, the boy displayed a rare blend of qualities. On one hand, he was playful, mischievous, and full of life. On the other, he showed unusual depth, silence, and thoughtfulness for a child. His sparkling eyes, broad forehead, and fearless nature made him stand apart even in his tender years. Childhood wonders. Stories of Narendra's childhood are full of charm and meaning. Once, when he was very small, his mother scolded him gently for being restless. In response, the boy asked her with innocent seriousness, "Mother, what is it that binds me to this world?" His mother, astonished at such a profound question, realized that her son was no ordinary child. Narendra had immense courage. Even in the face of snakes or frightening noises, he would remain unshaken. His friends admired him as a leader, for he always protected the weak and stood up for truth. At the same time, he was affectionate and kind, never allowing anyone to feel left out. His mother often told him stories from the Ramayana and Mahabharata, filling his mind with ideals of heroism, devotion, and self-sacrifice. These tales sank deep into his heart. Sometimes young Narendra would imagine himself as a warrior fighting for righteousness, at other times as a monk renouncing the world for God. Such impressions shaped his destiny. Education and early talents. As he grew, Narendra received formal education. He attended the Metropolitan Institution of Calcutta and later the Presidency College. His teachers were struck by his brilliance. He possessed a sharp memory, could grasp lessons quickly, and had a natural gift for oratory. Even in his teenage years, he could recite passages from Milton and Shakespeare with eloquence, while also chanting verses from the Upanishads with equal ease. His interests were not limited to books. He was strong in physique and took part in gymnastics, wrestling, and horse riding. His personality combined vigor of body with vigor of mind. Friends and teachers alike felt that here was a youth destined for greatness. But what marked him most was his spirit of inquiry. He would never accept a belief blindly. He wanted proof, experience, and reason. When someone spoke of God, he would ask, "Have you seen him? If he exists, can one know him as one knows a friend?" This burning question, "Has anyone seen God?" would later shape his meeting with his master, Sri Ramakrishna. A family crisis. In the midst of his promising youth, destiny struck a blow. His father, Vishwanath Datta, suddenly passed away. The family, once living in comfort, was plunged into poverty. Creditors pressed hard, relatives turned away, and the young Narendra had to face the harsh realities of life. Many nights he went without food so that his mother and siblings might eat. Yet even in these difficult days, he never lost his courage. This period of suffering strengthened his resolve to find truth. He realized that worldly wealth is uncertain, that human relations can be fragile, and that only God is eternal. The hunger in his body became one with the hunger in his soul, the hunger to know God and the meaning of existence. Seeds of a mission. Even before he met his master, Narendra had dreams and visions that hinted at his spiritual destiny. Sometimes he felt a divine presence guiding him. At other times, he would fall into deep meditation, forgetting the world around him. His friends noticed that when he sang devotional songs, his face would shine with an unusual light, as though touched by the divine. The contrast in his life was striking. On one side, he loved music, sports, debate, and laughter. On the other, he carried within him a storm of spiritual yearning. He was both a child of joy and a seeker of the infinite. In later years, Swami Vivekananda himself would say, "From my birth, I was stirred with religion. At times, I remember, I used to go into deep meditation, and then I could see light all around me. It was a state of ecstasy. I could see figures, sometimes of gods and goddesses. I used to feel that I must understand who I am and why I am here." The boy who was born in Calcutta that winter morning was no ordinary child. He carried within him the flame of renunciation, the courage of a lion, and the compassion of a saint. The world knew him as Narendranath Datta, but destiny was preparing to reveal him as Swami Vivekananda, the Awakener of India and the messenger of Vedanta to the West. And thus began the story of a life that would not only transform India, but also inspire humanity across oceans and centuries. Chapter 2. A Brilliant Student. Narendranath Datta's early years were marked by curiosity, courage, and brilliance. As he grew into boyhood, these qualities shone even brighter. He was not just another student in Calcutta schools. He was a spirit destined to stand apart, questioning, challenging, and mastering whatever came before him. Early education. Narendra's schooling began at the Metropolitan Institution of Calcutta, founded by the reformer Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar. The school emphasized rational thinking, secular education, and character building. Young Narendra absorbed these values deeply. He loved learning and displayed an astonishing memory. Often, after hearing a poem or a passage just once, he could repeat it word for word. Yet, his education was not confined to books alone. He was equally fond of games, music, and conversation. His teachers noticed that he had the rare ability to grasp the essence of a subject quickly. Mathematics, history, and literature all seemed easy to him. More than once, his classmates marveled at his sharp reasoning, which made even his teachers smile with admiration. Influence of Western thought. As a teenager, Narendra joined Presidency College, one of the most prestigious institutions of Calcutta. There, he came into contact with Western philosophy and science. He read voraciously Plato, Aristotle, Kant, Hume, and Herbert Spencer. He explored the works of Darwin and learned about evolution. He studied logic, psychology, and the new discoveries of physics. This exposure widened his mind. He realized that truth could not be bound by tradition alone. It must stand the test of reason. Western thought gave him intellectual discipline, while Indian scriptures gave him spiritual depth. His mind became a meeting ground of East and West. Yet, the more he read, the more restless he became. Books could not quench his thirst. He wanted experience. He wanted to know, is God real? Can he be seen, not merely imagined? Musical soul. Alongside his studies, Narendra developed a deep love for music. He had a melodious voice and trained in both Indian and Western styles. He could sing devotional songs with deep feeling and at other times play classical tunes on the sitar. His friends often requested him to sing during gatherings. But music for him was not mere entertainment. It was a doorway to the divine. Whenever he sang hymns in praise of God, his face would glow and listeners felt transported. Even as a youth, people sensed a spiritual fire in him. Physical strength and fearlessness. Narendra was no bookish recluse. He cultivated his body with as much care as his mind. He loved gymnastics, wrestling, and horse riding. He believed that strength was essential for spiritual life, for a weak body could not carry a strong soul. His fearlessness became legendary. Once, while walking in a garden, he saw a snake. Instead of running, he calmly looked at it until it slithered away. His companions, trembling, asked how he remained so calm. He replied with a smile, "Why should I fear? We all are children of the same God." This fearless nature would later become a hallmark of Swami Vivekanand's teachings. He would urge the youth of India, "Strength, strength, it is that we need above all else. Strength is life, weakness is death." The burning question. Despite his outward brilliance, an inner storm raged within him. The question of God haunted his soul. He visited many learned men, saints, and philosophers, asking them all the same question: "Have you seen God?" Some gave him long discourses, others quoted scriptures, and a few avoided the question altogether. But none satisfied him. For Narendra, second-hand knowledge was not enough. He longed for a direct, living experience of the divine. This quest sometimes left him restless. He would meditate for hours trying to grasp the truth. He joined the Brahmo Samaj, a reformist movement that believed in the formless God and rejected idol worship. The Brahmo leaders were impressed by his intellect and oratory, but still his heart was not at rest. He wanted a guide, someone who could not only speak of God but also show him. A crisis at home. During this time, fate tested him once again. His father, Vishwanath Datta, passed away suddenly in 1884. The comfortable life of the family collapsed overnight. Creditors pressed for payment, relatives withdrew their support, and the household was reduced to poverty. Narendra, still a student, shouldered the burden of supporting his mother and siblings. Many nights he wandered the streets of Kolkata hungry, with only his burning faith to sustain him. Yet, even in this misery, he never stooped to dishonesty. He preferred hunger to compromise. This period hardened him, teaching him the harsh truths of life. It deepened his sympathy for the poor and sharpened his resolve to find a truth that could endure even in suffering. Later, as Swami Vivekananda, he would declare, "So long as millions live in hunger and ignorance, I hold every man a traitor who, having been educated at their expense, pays not the least heed to them." Glimpses of destiny. Despite hardship, Narendra's talents shone ever brighter. His debates at college halls left audiences spellbound. His friends admired not only his intellect but also his moral courage. He refused to flatter professors or follow traditions blindly. He spoke with honesty, even if it offended. One professor, deeply impressed, remarked, "Narendra, you are a genius. You will one day become a great man." But genius alone could not quench his inner fire. Again and again, the question rose in him, "Is there a God? Can he be seen?" It was at this critical moment, when intellect, poverty, and spiritual thirst converged, that fate guided him to the one man who would transform his life, the simple saint of Dakshineshwar, Sri Ramakrishna. This meeting would change not only Narendra's destiny, but also the spiritual destiny of modern India. Chapter 3. Quest for Truth. Meeting Sri Ramakrishna. By the mid-1880s, Narendranath Datta had become well known among his friends and teachers as a brilliant, restless, and fearless young man. Yet deep within, a question burned like fire. Is there a God? Can he be seen as I see you? Can one touch, feel, and know him directly? Narendra longed for certainty, not speculation. He had studied the scriptures, debated with philosophers, joined the Brahmo Samaj, and meditated alone. But all these only added fuel to his thirst. He wanted living proof. And so, destiny guided him to the humble temple garden of Dakshineshwar, where an unlettered mystic named Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa lived. First visit to Dakshineshwar. In 1881, while studying at Scottish Church College, Narendra often visited gatherings of spiritual seekers. One of his professors, Rev. William Hastie, noticing Narendra's deep interest in philosophy, once suggested, "If you want to understand what true ecstasy is, you should go to Dakshineshwar and meet Sri Ramakrishna. He alone can explain it." Curiosity stirred within him. Soon, with a group of friends, Narendra went to Dakshineshwar to see this remarkable man. Sri Ramakrishna, a simple priest of the Kali temple, lived in a small room within the temple compound. His appearance was ordinary, thin, barefoot, clad in a white cloth. But his eyes shone with childlike purity and divine love. As soon as Narendra entered, Sri Ramakrishna looked at him with tears of joy and whispered, "Ah, you have come at last. How long I have been waiting for you. You are that Narayan, that great soul sent by the Divine Mother." Narendra, skeptical by nature, was taken aback. He had never met this man before,
Yet here was a saint overflowing with affection, as though he had known him for ages. The famous question. After some conversation, Narendra put forward the question that had troubled him for years. "Sir, have you seen God?" Sri Ramakrishna's reply was calm, certain, and unlike anything he had ever heard. "Yes, I have seen God. I see Him more clearly than I see you. I talk to Him as I talk to you. I can show Him to you as well." For the first time, Narendra found someone who spoke not from books but from direct experience. He was deeply impressed, though still cautious. He decided to test this man further.
The touch of ecstasy. During the first visit, Sri Ramakrishna gently touched Narendra. At once, the world around him seemed to vanish. The room, the walls, the people, everything dissolved into a vast ocean of consciousness. Narendra felt as though he were losing his own identity in an infinite sea. Terrified, he cried out, "What are you doing to me? I have my parents. I must return to them." Sri Ramakrishna laughed softly and withdrew his touch. At once, Narendra returned to normal. This strange experience shook him to the core. All his scientific reasoning and logical questioning could not explain what had just happened. Struggles of faith. Despite these experiences, Narendra was not ready to accept Sri Ramakrishna easily. His rational mind resisted surrender. He argued, questioned, and even doubted the saint. Sometimes he thought Sri Ramakrishna was simply a madman, intoxicated with religion. Yet, whenever he resolved not to return, some mysterious force drew him back. Sri Ramakrishna, on his part, treated Narendra with tender patience. He never demanded blind faith. He encouraged him to test, to question, to experience for himself. Gradually, the young seeker began to realize that this simple priest possessed a wisdom deeper than any philosophy and a love purer than any human affection. A mother's prayer fulfilled. Narendra's mother, Bhuvneshwari Devi, had once prayed to Lord Shiva for a son who would serve the world. That prayer seemed to be unfolding now. In Sri Ramakrishna, Narendra found not only a spiritual teacher, but also a loving father, a guide, and a divine mirror that reflected his own destiny. The saint recognized in Narendra the future leader who would carry his message to the world. Once he said to him, "You are Narayana himself, born on earth to remove the miseries of mankind. When you sing, the very gods listen. The day you realize who you are, you will shake the world." The inner conflict. Yet, Narendra's journey was not smooth. His sharp intellect often clashed with his growing faith. At times, he doubted everything. He tested Sri Ramakrishna in many ways, even mocking him. But each time, he found the saint's love unshaken, his wisdom unfathomable. Once, when Narendra was penniless, he asked Sri Ramakrishna to pray to Mother Kali for the welfare of his family. Sri Ramakrishna gently urged him to go himself. With reluctance, Narendra entered the temple of the Divine Mother. But when he stood before the image of Kali, he found himself unable to ask for money or comfort. Instead, words burst forth from his heart. "Mother, grant me true knowledge, devotion, and renunciation." Twice he tried, thrice he tried, but each time he asked only for spiritual treasures, never for worldly needs. Finally, Sri Ramakrishna smiled and said,
Your family will never lack simple food and clothing. But you are not born for wealth. You are born for the highest truth. Preparing the disciple. Over the years, Narendra became the leader among Ramakrishna's young disciples. His courage, clarity, and questioning spirit inspired the others. Sri Ramakrishna often declared, "Other disciples are like small lights, but Narendra is a blazing lamp. Through him, my message will spread far and wide." Sri Ramakrishna trained him carefully, leading him through meditation, devotional practices, and service. He showed him that all religions are true paths to the same God, and that the essence of religion lies in direct realization, not dogma. Though Narendra still struggled at times, his heart was being prepared for a mighty mission. The bond between master and disciple grew so deep that it went beyond words. It was a union of souls, eternal and unbreakable. Seeds of a mission. As years passed, Narendra realized that Sri Ramakrishna was not just a saint, but the very embodiment of divine truth. Gradually, the restless seeker began to bow before the infinite. His fiery intellect was being purified into a tool for higher purpose. In time, he would declare, "It was the Master who made me. Whatever I am, it is his work, not mine." The meeting of Narendra and Sri Ramakrishna was no ordinary encounter. It was the meeting of the ocean with the river, of potential with purpose, of restless questioning with eternal certainty. This meeting would not only transform Narendra into Swami Vivekananda, but also carry India's spiritual message to the whole world.
Chapter 4. The Transformation, Discipleship and Spiritual Awakening. The meeting of Narendranath Datta with Sri Ramakrishna at Dakshineshwar was not a mere chance encounter. It was the beginning of a sacred bond destined to transform an eager seeker into a world teacher. For Narendra, who had been searching restlessly for truth, Sri Ramakrishna became the living answer. For Sri Ramakrishna, who had prayed for disciples strong enough to carry his message to the world, Narendra was the chosen one. The Master's love. Sri Ramakrishna's love for Narendra was unlike anything the young man had ever experienced. It was pure, unconditional, and full of divine power. He saw in Narendra the fire of renunciation, the courage of a lion, and the brilliance of a sage. He would often say to others, "This boy is not an ordinary soul. He is Nara, and I am Narayana. He has come to fulfill a great mission. Through him, countless souls will be awakened." Narendra, however, was not one to surrender blindly. He questioned, argued, and even resisted Sri Ramakrishna's ways. His rational mind often clashed with the saint's mystical visions. At times, he would laugh and say, "Sir, your words sound like imagination. How can all religions be true?" Yet, beneath these challenges was a growing trust, for he saw that Sri Ramakrishna's words always flowed from direct experience. Lessons in humility. Sri Ramakrishna's training was not through lectures but through life itself. He taught his disciples to see God in every human being, to serve the poor as worship of the divine, and to realize that love, not pride, was the essence of spirituality. For Narendra, who was proud of his intellect and fearless spirit, this was not easy. Once he criticized another disciple for his simple devotion. Sri Ramakrishna gently rebuked him. "Why do you judge others? Everyone has their own path. He may be simple, but his love for God is sincere. Never look down on anyone." These lessons slowly softened Narendra's sharp edges.
He began to realize that true greatness lies not in argument but in compassion and surrender to the divine. Glimpses of the infinite. Under Sri Ramakrishna's guidance, Narendra had profound spiritual experiences. At times, during meditation, he felt his mind dissolve into a vast ocean of light. At other times, he would lose all sense of time and space, resting in pure bliss. One day, Sri Ramakrishna touched him on the chest and said, "Awake, O lion, and see your true self." At once, Narendra entered a state of deep samadhi, experiencing unity with the infinite. When he came back, he whispered, "Now I know the truth. I am not the body, not the mind, but pure spirit." Yet, Sri Ramakrishna did not allow him to remain absorbed in ecstasy for long. He reminded him again and again, "You are born for a greater work. Enjoying samadhi is not your mission. You must live in the world, serve humanity, and awaken others. Your very bones will cry out the message of strength and fearlessness."
The final test. Sri Ramakrishna knew that Narendra had to be tested and strengthened, for one day he would carry the burden of a worldwide mission. He often placed him in difficult situations, denying him special treatment and asking him to perform humble tasks. At times, Narendra felt hurt, but he accepted it with growing humility. He realized that the master was burning away his ego, preparing him like steel in fire. Later, as Swami Vivekananda, he would say, "The master made me over by his touch. He trained me not by words but by his living example." The song of the disciple. Despite struggles, Narendra's devotion to Sri Ramakrishna deepened. His voice, trained in music, became a powerful instrument of worship. When he sang devotional songs in the master's room, Sri Ramakrishna would often enter ecstasy, tears flowing from his eyes. Other disciples felt uplifted, as though the very air vibrated with divine presence. Narendra himself often lost awareness of the world while singing. His songs became offerings of the soul, uniting the disciple with the master in a bond beyond words. The passing of the torch. In 1885, Sri Ramakrishna fell seriously ill with throat cancer. The disciples, especially Narendra, devoted themselves to his care. Day and night they served him, forgetting their own comfort. Though Narendra was poor and struggling at home, he lived near the master to look after him. During this time, Sri Ramakrishna entrusted his spiritual treasures to Narendra. He declared, "Whatever I have achieved, I give to you. Through you, my message will spread to the four corners of the world. Your very voice will awaken nations." One evening, in a quiet moment, Sri Ramakrishna called Narendra close and whispered, "Do you not see? The Divine Mother herself dwells in you. You are her chosen instrument. Serve her mission." Narendra bowed silently, tears in his eyes. He knew that his life was no longer his own. It belonged to God and humanity. The transformation complete. By the time Sri Ramakrishna left his mortal body in August 1886, Narendra was transformed. The restless, questioning youth had become a disciple with unshakable faith. The proud student had become a humble servant of the divine. The seeker who once asked, "Have you seen God?" had himself touched the infinite. Yet this transformation was not an end, but a beginning.
For now, with the master gone, Narendra and his fellow disciples stood at a crossroad. They had no money, no institution, no security, but they had the fire of Sri Ramakrishna's teachings, and above all, they had Narendra as their leader. From this point onward, Narendranath Datta was no longer merely a brilliant student or a questioning seeker. He was a monk in spirit, ready to renounce the world and dedicate himself fully to the mission entrusted to him. Soon the world would know him by a new name, Swami Vivekananda.
Chapter 5 The Master Departs, Ramakrishna's Passing and Narendra's Inner Struggles. The year 1885 was a time of trial for the little band of young men who had gathered around Sri Ramakrishna at Dakshineshwar. Their beloved master, the fountain of divine love and the living proof of God's reality, had fallen gravely ill. His body, once radiant with vitality, now suffered from the painful affliction of throat cancer. For his disciples, the sight of their master's decline was heartbreaking, yet they clung to him with devotion, serving him day and night. Among them, Narendranath stood as the pillar of strength. Though he himself was burdened with poverty and family struggles, he gave himself fully to the service of the Master. His fearless spirit and organizing power kept the group united, while his music and conversation often lifted their weary hearts. Service at Shampukur and Kasipur. As Sri Ramakrishna's condition worsened, the disciples moved him first to Shampukur in Calcutta and later to a small rented garden house at Kasipur, where the air was cleaner. There, they formed a close-knit brotherhood, caring for the Master with tender devotion. The scene at Kasipur was one of mingled sorrow and joy. On the one hand, they witnessed the physical suffering of their beloved teacher. On the other, they felt blessed by his unbroken flow of divine presence. Even in pain, Sri Ramakrishna would enter states of ecstasy, forgetting his body in communion with the Divine Mother. For the disciples, these days became a sacred school of spiritual training. Sri Ramakrishna constantly reminded them, never forget, God alone is real, the world is illusory. Hold fast to God, serve all beings as God himself. Narendra's leadership. In those difficult months, Narendra emerged as the natural leader of the group. He encouraged the others to be strong, to accept suffering as part of spiritual discipline, and to continue their sadhana with zeal. Though only in his early 20s, his authority was instinctively recognized. His words carried conviction, for he himself lived what he taught. His nights were often spent in meditation and his days in service. He inspired the others to rise above grief and prepare for a life dedicated to God. Yet within him storms raged. The thought of losing the Master filled him with anguish. Could life have meaning without Sri Ramakrishna's living presence? Would the flame of truth continue to burn after his passing? The final blessing. In these final months, Sri Ramakrishna bestowed his last and greatest gift upon Narendra. One day, when the disciples were seated near him, the Master called Narendra to his side. Placing his feeble hand upon his disciple's chest, he whispered with deep emotion, "Naren, today I have given you all my power. With these will you do great things. What I had, I have passed on to you. By this, people will know you as they know me. Through you, the Mother will accomplish her work."
Narendra, overwhelmed, felt a current of spiritual power rushing into him. In that moment, he understood that the Master was entrusting him with a divine mission.
The passing of the Master. On the night of August 15, 1886, the inevitable came. At Kausipur, surrounded by his beloved disciples, Sri Ramakrishna entered his final state of ecstasy. Gazing upon the image of the Divine Mother, he whispered, "Ma, Ma," and then, with a smile upon his lips, he passed into eternal silence. The room was filled with a sacred stillness. The disciples wept, yet they also felt that their Master had not truly died. His spirit was with them, invisible but living. For Narendra, the loss was profound. It was as if the very ground had been taken from under his feet. The one person who had answered his deepest questions, who had shown him God, was no longer there in human form. He felt both grief and responsibility pressing upon his heart. A time of trial. After the cremation, the disciples returned to Calcutta, but without the Master, their lives seemed directionless. Some went back to their families, others wandered. Poverty struck them hard, and society mocked them as foolish youths wasting their lives in religious dreams. Narendra himself was torn between duty to his impoverished family and loyalty to the Master's mission. At home, his mother and siblings looked to him as their only support. Yet his soul longed for renunciation and the life of a monk. The struggle was intense, and many nights he wept in solitude. The resolve of renunciation. Gradually, however, her inner strength triumphed. He recalled the Master's words, "Naren, you are born for a great mission. The Mother will protect your family. Do not fear." With this assurance, he resolved to dedicate himself fully to spiritual life. Together with a few brother disciples, he gathered at a dilapidated house in Baranagar on the banks of the Ganges. There, they lived as monks, taking vows of renunciation, wearing ochre robes, and sustaining themselves on meager food. The house echoed with their chanting, prayers, and discussions of the Master's teachings. It was in this humble setting that Narendranath Datta gradually became Swami Vivekananda. Inner struggles and vision. Yet the path was not without obstacles. Doubts sometimes returned, and the burden of leadership weighed heavily upon him. But in moments of despair, he would remember the Master's touch, his words, and his unshakable faith. Slowly, Narendra realized that Sri Ramakrishna had not left him. The Master now lived within his heart, guiding him from within. One night, while meditating deeply, he had a vision of the Master, who smiled and said, "Why do you fear? I am ever with you. You will do my work. Fear not." From that moment, Vivekananda's heart became steady as a rock. Preparing for the future. The death of Sri Ramakrishna, though painful, became the crucible that shaped Narendra into Vivekananda. He had lost his earthly master, but gained the realization that the divine was ever present. He had lost external support, but discovered his inner strength. From this point on, his mission became clear: to carry the Master's message to the world, to awaken India from its slumber, and to spread the truth of Vedanta to the West. The disciple was now becoming the teacher, the seeker, the guide, the flame, the torchbearer. The Master had departed, but his spirit blazed on in the heart of Vivekananda. Chapter 6. The Wandering Monk Travels Across India, Realization of the Nation's Soul. The passing of Sri Ramakrishna in 1886 marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. For Narendra Datta, now clothed in the ochre robes of renunciation, it was the start of a life that would take him far beyond Calcutta, far beyond Bengal, even far beyond India. His master's mission had to be carried forward, and the only way to prepare for it was through direct experience. To wander across the length and breadth of India, to touch its soil, to see its people, and to feel its pulse. The Baranagar Monastery. After the cremation of Sri Ramakrishna, his young disciples gathered at a dilapidated house in Baranagar near the Ganges. There they formed a small monastery, living like monks, praying, meditating, studying scriptures, and depending on alms for survival. Life was austere. They slept on the bare floor, ate simple food, and wore coarse ochre robes. Yet their hearts were filled with the Master's presence. Amid chants of the Upanishads and songs of devotion, their brotherhood grew strong. It was here that Narendra truly emerged as their leader, guiding them with firmness and love. But he knew that life at Baranagar was only preparation. The world awaited them. For himself, he longed to wander, to see India not through books but with his own eyes. He wanted to understand her strengths, her weaknesses, her glory, and her suffering. And so, in 1888, at the age of 25, he set out alone as a wandering monk. A monk on the road. With no possessions except a staff, a begging bowl, and the ochre robe, Narendra walked from village to village, town to town. Sometimes he slept under trees, sometimes in temples, sometimes in the huts of the poor. Often he went without food, yet never did his spirit falter. Wherever he went, he sought knowledge, not only of scriptures and philosophies, but of life itself. He met holy men of different sects, scholars of different schools, and common people of every walk of life. He listened, he questioned, he absorbed. He visited sacred sites, Varanasi, Ayodhya, Mathura, Vrindavan, Haridwar, Almora, and many others. He bathed in the Gangas, meditated in forests, climbed mountains, and crossed rivers. Each place deepened his love for his motherland. Encounters with poverty. As he traveled, Vivekananda came face to face with the harsh realities of India's condition. He saw villages steeped in poverty, peasants broken by hunger, and masses bound by ignorance and superstition. His heart bled for them. Once, when he had not eaten for 2 days, he knocked at the door of a house in Varanasi asking for food. The woman of the house looked at his radiant face, wept, and placed before him the little rice she had saved for her children. Such encounters pierced his soul. He realized that religion in India could not merely be about rituals or renunciation. It had to serve humanity. Later, he would declare, "It is an insult to a starving man to teach him metaphysics. First, give him food, then teach him spirituality."
Hospitality of princes. At times, fortune smiled upon him. Several Indian rulers recognized his genius and welcomed him into their courts. The Maharaja of Khetri, Ajit Singh, became one of his closest friends and benefactors. In Khetri, Narendra not only received hospitality, but also spread his message of strength, fearlessness, and service. It was the Maharaja of Khetri who later gave him the name Vivekanand, meaning the bliss of discerning wisdom. The Himalayas and spiritual insight. Vivekananda wandered through the majestic Himalayas where sages had meditated for centuries. There, amid snow peaks and silent forests, he tasted the joy of deep meditation. The stillness of the mountains mirrored the stillness of the soul. In Almora, Rishikesh and beyond, he contemplated the unity of existence, realizing that the same divine spirit dwells in all beings. Yet, even in those lofty moments, the image of starving millions haunted him. He felt a call greater than personal liberation, the call to uplift his people. From west to south, his wanderings took him across western India, through Gujarat, Rajasthan, Maharashtra, where he visited ancient temples and met reformers. He saw the ruins of once great cities and understood how neglect and division had weakened India. In the south, he experienced new inspiration. At Madras, young men flocked to him, eager to hear his fiery words about India's spiritual heritage and her need for awakening. Their enthusiasm convinced him that the youth of India could become the builders of a new nation. The Rock at Kanyakumari. The turning point came in December 1892 at the southernmost tip of India, Kanyakumari. There, gazing upon the vast ocean, Vivekananda's heart overflowed with grief and hope. He swam across to a rocky islet and sat in meditation for 3 days. Before his mind's eye passed the centuries of India's history, her ancient glory, her decline, her present misery. He saw clearly the cause of her downfall: neglect of the masses, loss of self-confidence, and blind imitation of the West. And he saw the remedy: awakening the spiritual power of the nation, combined with service, education, and unity. On that rock, he resolved his mission: I will dedicate my life to my motherland. I will rouse her sleeping soul. I will carry her message to the world. That meditation at Kanyakumari transformed him from a wandering monk into a prophet of national regeneration. Vision of the West. By now, his fame had spread. Admirers urged him to attend the Parliament of Religions to be held in Chicago in 1893. They believed that his message could represent the essence of Hinduism before the world. Vivekananda hesitated. He had no money, and the idea of crossing the seas was daunting. But the thought grew stronger. Perhaps this was the way to carry out the Master's prophecy, to spread Vedanta across the globe. The Maharaja of Khetri and other well-wishers provided funds for his journey. Thus, after years of wandering and preparation, Vivekananda stood ready to take his next step, not merely as a monk of India, but as a voice for humanity. The nation's soul. By the time he left the shores of India in 1893, Swami Vivekananda had traversed the land from the Himalayas to Cape Comorin, from Bengal to Gujarat. He had seen the glory of India's past and the pain of her present. He had touched both palaces and hearts, spoken with princes and peasants, shared food with scholars and beggars. Through it all, he realized a profound truth. India's soul is spiritual, and her regeneration must begin with spiritual awakening. But spirituality must not mean escape. It must flow into action, service, and the uplift of the poor. This realization, born of wandering, became the foundation of his mission. The monk who once sought only God had now embraced God in the form of humanity. Chapter 7: Chicago Calling, Journey to America, Struggle and Preparation. The meditation at Kanyakumari in December 1892 had ignited a fire in Swami Vivekananda's heart. He had resolved to dedicate his life to the service of his motherland, to awaken her people, and to carry her spiritual treasures to the world. Fate soon opened a door, the World's Parliament of Religions, to be held in Chicago in 1893 as part of the Great Columbian Exposition, celebrating the 400th anniversary of Columbus' discovery of America. Call to the West. News of this parliament reached India through newspapers and friends. It was to be a gathering of representatives of all major faiths, an unprecedented platform for inter-religious dialogue. Leaders in Madras who had been inspired by Vivekananda's speeches urged him to attend as the representative of Hinduism. At first, he hesitated. He was a monk with no means of support. To cross the seas was expensive, and for many traditionalists, even unholy. But gradually, he saw it as the will of the Divine Mother. Had not Sri Ramakrishna himself predicted, Narendra will one day shake the world with his message? The Maharaja of Khetri, his devoted friend, and other admirers in Madras came forward with funds. With their help, Vivekananda prepared for the great journey. The voyage begins. On May 31, 1893, Swami Vivekananda left Bombay aboard the steamer Peninsula. He was 30 years old. Clad in his simple ochre robe and turban, he carried little more than faith, courage, and a burning mission. The ship carried him first to Colombo, then to Penang, Singapore, Hong Kong, Canton, and finally to Japan. At each stop, he observed the life of the people, marveling at the energy of nations that had embraced modernity without losing their traditions. In Japan, he was especially impressed by the cleanliness, discipline, and national pride of the people. From Japan, he sailed across the Pacific, arriving in Vancouver, Canada, and then traveled by train across the continent to reach Chicago in July 1893.
The shock of reality. But on arriving in America, he was met with a rude shock. The Parliament of Religions was not to begin until September, and registration required proper references. Vivekananda, a stranger in a new land, had neither. His funds were meager, and soon he found himself penniless in a foreign country. He wandered the streets of Chicago, hungry and footsore. At one point, he knocked at the door of a house, asking if he might do some work in return for food. The lady of the house, moved by his dignity and appearance, invited him in and fed him. Later, she connected him with friends who helped him travel to Boston. There, he found temporary shelter with a kindly professor, J.H. Wright of Harvard University. The professor, astonished by Vivekananda's vast knowledge and eloquence, wrote to the organizers of the parliament, "Here is a man who is more learned than all our professors put together. You must hear him." This recommendation opened the way for Vivekananda to be officially invited to the parliament. A stranger in a strange land. While waiting for the event, Vivekananda continued to experience the stark contrasts of the West. On the one hand, he admired America's energy, organization, and prosperity. On the other, he was pained by its materialism and indifference to the poor. He often thought of India starving millions and wondered how his mission could bridge East and West to bring India the strength of material progress and give the West the light of spiritual wisdom. The day of destiny approaches. As September 1893 approached, excitement mounted. Delegates from all parts of the world gathered in Chicago. Christian ministers, Jewish rabbis, Buddhist monks, Islamic scholars, and Hindu representatives. The parliament was to be held in the Grand Art Institute of Chicago before thousands of people. For Vivekananda, it was a moment of great inner tension.
He had come without worldly backing, without wealth or fame. Yet, he carried the spiritual authority of centuries of Indian wisdom, the blessings of his master, and the fire of a divine mission. On the eve of the Parliament, he prayed earnestly to the Divine Mother, "O Mother, give me strength to speak the truth boldly, to awaken this world with thy message." A test of faith. In those days, Vivekananda's outward appearance puzzled many. His turban and flowing robe stood out in the American crowd. Some looked at him with curiosity, others with suspicion. But wherever he went, his noble bearing, serene eyes, and magnetic presence won respect. He was still uncertain of how he would be received at the Parliament. Would the West mock the voice of India, or would they listen? But deep within, he knew that the moment was not his alone. It was India's moment, the message of Vedanta's universality waiting to be heard. Poised on the threshold. Thus, by September 10, 1893, Swami Vivekananda stood ready at the Parliament of Religions, not merely as a monk of India, but as the chosen messenger of a timeless truth. The trials of his wandering, the hardships of poverty, the strength gained at Kanyakumari, the blessings of Sri Ramakrishna, all had prepared him for this hour. In his own words later, "The moment I stepped on American soil, I felt a great responsibility. I knew that my master was guiding me, that I was not there for myself, but for him and for India." He was poised on the threshold of history, about to speak words that would echo across the world, words that would awaken East and West alike, words that would forever change the place of India in the family of nations.
Chapter 8. The Voice That Conquered. The Chicago Address and its Impact. The morning of September 11, 1893 dawned bright in Chicago. The Grand Art Institute, decorated with flags of many nations, thrummed with anticipation. The world's Parliament of Religions was about to begin, an assembly unprecedented in history. Representatives of all faiths had gathered. Christian bishops, Jewish rabbis, Muslim scholars, Buddhist monks, Zoroastrian priests, and Hindu swamis. Among them, a lone monk from India, clad in a saffron robe and turban, sat quietly. He was not officially well known, nor did he represent any powerful institution. Yet in him burned a fire greater than worldly power, the fire of truth, the blessing of his master, and the soul of India. This was Swami Vivekananda. Nervous silence. As the proceedings began, one after another, learned men rose and delivered long speeches, rich in erudition but heavy with theological jargon. When Vivekananda's turn came, he hesitated. His name had been placed last on the list, for he was virtually unknown. At first, he felt nervous. The vast hall was filled with thousands of expectant eyes, men and women of intellect and influence. He was a stranger in a strange land, with no backing of power or wealth. For a moment, doubt crossed his mind. Then he closed his eyes and prayed to his master. "O Mother, O Lord, give me strength. Speak through me." A calm descended upon him. He rose, adjusted his robe, and stepped to the podium. Sisters and brothers of America. When he opened his lips, his first words were, "Sisters and brothers of America." The audience, accustomed to dry and formal addresses, was stunned. The words rang with sincerity and warmth. They were not the words of a diplomat, but of a soul speaking from the heart. For a moment, silence filled the hall. Then, like a wave, thunderous applause erupted. The entire audience rose to its feet, cheering and clapping for nearly 2 minutes.
Here was no stranger. He had, in a single phrase, embraced them as family. When the noise subsided, Vivekananda continued, his voice steady and powerful. I am proud to belong to a religion which has taught the world both tolerance and universal acceptance. We believe not only in universal toleration, but we accept all religions as true.
The message of harmony. In simple yet majestic words, he unfolded the message of Vedanta, the oneness of all religions, the unity of all humanity, the divinity of the soul. He quoted from the ancient scriptures, as different streams, having their sources in different places, all mingle their water in the sea. So, O Lord, the different paths which men take through different tendencies, various though they appear, crooked or straight, all lead to Thee. He declared that sectarianism, bigotry and fanaticism had long devastated the earth, filled it with violence and hatred. But the time had come for a new spirit of harmony and peace. The effect was electric. The audience listened spellbound. His words carried not only logic, but also a spiritual power that touched hearts. Many later said that they felt as though they were in the presence of a prophet. The impact. When he concluded, the hall once again erupted in applause. Vivekananda had conquered the parliament in a single address. Overnight, he became a sensation. Newspapers across America reported about the young monk from India, whose words had lit up the gathering. One paper wrote, "He is undoubtedly the greatest figure in the parliament. After hearing him, we feel how foolish it is to send missionaries to India." Another declared, "Vivekananda is an orator by divine right, and his masterly delivery is but the outcome of his great personality." Subsequent addresses. In the days that followed, Vivekananda delivered several more addresses at the parliament, each deepening his impact. He spoke of the harmony of religions, the spiritual heritage of India, the universality of the soul, and the need for service to humanity. He emphasized that religion is not about dogma, but about realization, not about fighting, but about love. He declared, "Holiness, purity, and charity are not the exclusive possessions of any church in the world. Every system has produced men and women of the most exalted character." His speeches were not mere words. They carried the authority of a man who had lived them, who had walked barefoot among the poor, who had seen God face to face. A new role. From that moment, Vivekananda was no longer just a wandering monk of India. He had become a global voice for spiritual unity. Invitations poured in from across America. Societies, churches, and universities wanted to hear him. His simple robe and turban became symbols of India's wisdom. For India herself, his success was a matter of pride. Newspapers back home rejoiced. A son of Bharat had stood on the world stage and spoken with authority, not as a subject of a colonized nation, but as a representative of a timeless civilization. A voice for the ages. What made Vivekananda's words so powerful? It was not only his eloquence, but his authenticity. He spoke as one who had renounced everything, who sought nothing for himself, who lived only for truth and service. His message was not of conflict, but of harmony, not of superiority, but of unity. He reminded the West that material progress without spiritual wisdom leads to emptiness. And he reminded India that spirituality without service to humanity is incomplete. The aftermath.
In the weeks after the Parliament, people continued to speak of his address. Wherever he went, crowds gathered. Journalists called him the cyclonic Hindu monk. Women admired his dignity and purity. Scholars marveled at his intellect, and common people felt uplifted by his warmth. For Vivekananda himself, the triumph was humbling. He saw it not as his achievement, but as the will of the Divine Mother, the blessing of his master. He often said, "It is he who speaks, not I. I am only the instrument." A turning point. Thus, the Parliament of Religions marked a turning point not only in Vivekananda's life, but in the dialogue between East and West. For the first time, the spiritual voice of India had been heard on a world platform with clarity, dignity, and power. Vivekananda had shown that India was not a land of superstition and poverty alone, as colonial propaganda claimed, but a land of profound wisdom that could guide humanity. The echo of that first salutation, "Sisters and Brothers of America," still resounds, reminding the world of the possibility of harmony among all peoples. Chapter 9. Triumph and Trials. Years in America and Europe. The thunderous applause that followed Swami Vivekananda's address at the Parliament of Religions in September 1893 was only the beginning. In a single speech, he had captured the imagination of the West. Newspapers hailed him as a prince among men, a Hindu monk of commanding presence, and the star of the Parliament. Invitations poured in from every direction. America and Europe longed to hear more from this radiant figure who spoke of unity, spirituality, and service with such clarity and conviction. A spiritual ambassador. In the months following the Parliament, Vivekananda became a sought-after speaker across the United States. Churches, lecture halls, and universities invited him to address audiences eager to understand India's philosophy. Wherever he went, crowds filled the halls, often overflowing into the streets. He spoke on the Vedanta philosophy, explaining the oneness of existence, the divinity of the soul, and the harmony of religions. To intellectuals, his words were a revelation, opening vistas of thought beyond the boundaries of dogma. To ordinary men and women, his message brought comfort and inspiration. One of his favorite teachings was, "Each soul is potentially divine." The goal is to manifest this divinity within by controlling nature, external and internal. Do this by work or worship or psychic control or philosophy, by one or more or all of these, and be free. This is the whole of religion. The Vedanta societies. Soon, disciples began to gather around him. In New York, Detroit, and other cities, small groups formed to study Vedanta under his guidance. These became the seeds of the Vedanta societies, institutions that endure even today. Through them, Vivekananda introduced the West not only to Hindu philosophy but also to the practice of meditation, yoga, and selfless service. He emphasized that spirituality was not about conversion or ritual, but about realization and transformation of life. Challenges and misunderstandings. Yet his journey was not without trials. In America, he encountered suspicion from some Christian missionaries who feared that his teachings would undermine their work. Articles appeared in newspapers warning against Hindu mysticism. Some even accused him of being a fraud. There were also practical hardships. He often lived with little money, depending on the hospitality of friends and admirers. The bitter cold of American winters was hard on his health. Loneliness and fatigue sometimes weighed upon him. But he endured it all with patience and courage, sustained by his mission. To his disciples, he would say, "Truth will always triumph. Have faith, be strong, and the world will listen."
Journey to Europe. In 1895, after 2 years in America, Vivekananda crossed the Atlantic to Europe. There too, his presence created a stir. In England, he gave lectures that attracted leading intellectuals and spiritual seekers. Among those who became his devoted disciples were Margaret Noble, later known as Sister Nivedita, and Captain and Mrs. Xavier, who would later help him establish a monastery in the Himalayas. Nivedita, in particular, was inspired to dedicate her life to India, becoming one of Vivekananda's closest associates in his mission of service and education. In France, Germany, and Switzerland too, he found eager audiences. European scholars admired his erudition, while common people were moved by his sincerity and compassion. Message to the West. Vivekananda's message to the West was consistent and clear. He admired the energy, organization, and material progress of Western nations. But he warned against the dangers of materialism without spirituality. He declared, "The West has much to teach the East in the field of science and industry, but the East has much to teach the West in the field of the spirit. The future of humanity lies in the blending of these, material progress guided by spiritual wisdom." Inner struggles. Despite his outward triumphs, Vivekananda's years in the West were also a time of inner struggle. He often felt torn between his mission abroad and his longing to return to India. He knew that his countrymen were waiting for him, hungry for inspiration and guidance. At times, he grew weary of public life, yearning for solitude and meditation. Writing to a friend, he confessed, "How I long for the silence of the Himalayas, but the mother's work keeps me here." His health too began to suffer. The strain of constant travel, speaking engagements, and the harsh climate took their toll. Yet he pressed on, believing that his life was not his own, but belonged to his master's mission. A prophet's influence. By the late 1890s, Vivekananda had become a household name in spiritual circles across the West. His disciples described him as a man of extraordinary presence, majestic in form, fiery in speech, yet tender in heart. One American admirer wrote, "When he speaks, it is as if truth itself were pouring forth. He is not merely an orator, he is a prophet." Through his lectures and writings, he sowed seeds that would later blossom into a global appreciation for yoga, meditation, and interfaith understanding. Preparing for return. By 1897, Vivekananda knew it was time to return to India. He had carried India's message to the world. Now he had to bring the world's inspiration back to India. He envisioned a new India, proud of her heritage, united in spirit, and dedicated to the uplift of her masses. As he prepared to sail back, his disciples in the West wept at the thought of losing his presence. But he assured them, "This body may go, but my spirit will remain with you. Work for the truth, and we shall always be together." On the voyage home, his mind was filled with plans for monasteries, schools, hospitals, and institutions that would combine spirituality with service. He dreamed of an awakened India, rising once more to her rightful place among the nations. Triumph and trial.
Thus, his years in America and Europe were a blend of triumph and trial. He had faced hardships, loneliness, and criticism, but he had also won hearts, built institutions, and planted seeds of a spiritual renaissance. When he finally set sail for India in January 1897, he was no longer just Swami Vivekananda the monk. He was the voice of a resurgent nation, a bridge between East and West, a prophet whose message would echo far beyond his own time.
Chapter 10. Return to India, the Awakener of the Nation. On the chilly morning of January 15, 1897, the steamer Mombasa dropped anchor at the port of Colombo, Ceylon, modern-day Sri Lanka. After nearly 4 years abroad, Swami Vivekananda had returned to the East. But he was not the same unknown monk who had left India in 1893. He returned as a prophet, acclaimed in America and Europe, the spiritual ambassador of India to the world. The homecoming. News of his triumph at Chicago and his lectures across the West had already reached Indian shores. The nation, weary of colonial domination and hungry for pride, awaited him as a savior. From Colombo to Calcutta, his journey became a triumphant procession. At every station, multitudes gathered to see him, to touch his feet, to hear his words. When he landed at Colombo, he was welcomed by a vast crowd. In his first speech on Indian soil, he declared with a voice like thunder, "The problems of India can be solved only when you, the youth, awaken. Arise, awake, and stop not till the goal is reached." From that moment, his call to action spread like fire across the land. A triumph of spirit. As the train carrying him traveled from Ceylon to Calcutta, thousands thronged the stations. Flowers were showered, conches blown, and streets decorated. Never before had India seen such a reception for a monk. At Madras, where he had first been urged to go to Chicago, the city poured out its heart. At each stop, he gave stirring speeches, reminding Indians of their glorious heritage and urging them to rebuild their nation. Message to the nation. In his addresses, Vivekananda struck 3 key notes. Pride in India's spiritual heritage. He reminded his countrymen that India was not a beggar at the door of the West, but the teacher of the world in spirituality. Remember, he declared, we are the children of sages and rishis who gave religion to the world. Take pride in your birthright. Strength and fearlessness. He scolded Indians for their weakness and timidity. Colonial rule had bred inferiority. But Vivekananda roared, "You are the children of immortal bliss. The great sin is to think yourself weak. Stand up, be strong, proclaim the divinity within you." Service of the poor. Above all, he emphasized that true religion lay not in ritual but in service. He declared, "So long as millions live in hunger and ignorance, I hold every man a traitor, who, having been educated at their expense, pays not the least heed to them." These fiery words electrified India. For the first time in centuries, a leader was telling the people not only that they had a great past, but also that they had a great future.
Founding of the Ramakrishna Mission. Upon reaching Calcutta in February 1897, Vivekananda set about giving organizational shape to his ideals. He gathered his brother disciples of Sri Ramakrishna and established the Ramakrishna Mission at Belur on the banks of the Ganga. The mission was founded with a unique vision to combine the ancient monastic spirit of renunciation with the modern spirit of service. Its motto, taken from the Gita, was, "For one's own salvation and for the welfare of the world." Monks of the mission were to serve God in man, feeding the hungry, educating the illiterate, healing the sick, seeing in each person the living image of the divine. This was a revolutionary idea. Monks who for centuries had turned away from the world were now called to plunge into it, not for power or wealth, but for love and service. The Awakener of youth. Vivekanand's message especially struck the youth of India. His call, "Arise, awake," became their battle cry. Students, teachers, and young professionals were drawn to him, inspired to dedicate their lives to the service of the nation. He urged them, "What we want are muscles of iron and nerves of steel, inside which dwells a mind of the same material as that of which the thunderbolt is made. Stand up and be strong." For the youth, he was not just a monk, but a hero, a symbol of courage, strength, and confidence. A vision for education. Vivekananda also laid great stress on education as the foundation of national regeneration. But his idea of education was not mere book learning. He said, "Education is the manifestation of the perfection already in man. We must have life-building, man-making, character-making education. We must train not only the intellect but the heart and the hand." He dreamed of schools where young men and women would be taught both modern science and ancient spirituality, where they would learn not just to pass examinations but to build character and serve humanity.
The cry for the masses. Again and again, he reminded his followers that India's future lay in serving her poor. He declared, "Feel, my children, feel. Do you feel that millions are starving? Do you feel that ignorance has made them slaves? Do you feel that the poor of India are your very gods? Then only you will find salvation." This vision that to serve man is to serve God became the heart of the Ramakrishna mission's work and remains its guiding principle even today. A prophet at home. In a land long crushed by colonial rule, Vivekananda's words rang like a trumpet of awakening. For the first time, Indians felt proud of their heritage and hopeful for their future. Leaders of every community, Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, Christians, admired him. Nationalists saw in him a forerunner of independence, while ordinary people saw in him a saint who spoke their language. Rabindranath Tagore, the poet, later said, "If you want to know India, study Vivekananda. In him, everything is positive, nothing negative." The torch lit. By the end of 1897, Vivekananda had not only electrified the nation, but also built the framework for its spiritual and social revival. The Ramakrishna mission had been founded, the youth had been stirred, and a new wave of self-confidence had begun to sweep India. He had become more than a monk, he had become the awakener of a nation. Chapter 11. Building the Mission, Institutions, Disciples, and Social Service. After the thunder of his triumphant speeches across India in 1897, Swami Vivekananda turned to the task closest to his heart, giving permanent form to his master's vision and his own ideals. Words could inspire, but only institutions could carry the work forward across generations. Thus began the building of the Ramakrishna Mission, one of the most remarkable organizations of modern India. The vision of Belur Math. On the western bank of the holy Ganga, not far from Calcutta, stood a quiet tract of land. Here, in 1898, Swami Vivekananda established the headquarters of his movement, Belur Math.
To him, it was not just a monastery, but a living symbol of the harmony of religions. The very architecture of Belur Math was conceived to represent the spirit of unity. Its central shrine was designed to embody the features of a Hindu temple, a Christian church, and an Islamic mosque. To every visitor, it proclaimed a message dear to Vivekananda's heart. All religions are paths to the same truth. Belur Math was to be a training ground for monks dedicated to both contemplation and service. Its daily rhythm combined prayer and meditation with teaching, relief work, and the care of the poor. A new ideal of monasticism. For centuries, Indian monks had been wanderers or ascetics seeking personal liberation. But Vivekananda reshaped monasticism into a dynamic instrument of service. He declared, "The poor, the illiterate, the ignorant, the afflicted, let them be your God. Know that service to these alone is the highest worship of the divine." The young men who came to him were trained not only in meditation and scripture, but also in modern education, healthcare, and relief work. They were to be man-making monks, blending spirituality with practical service. This transformation was revolutionary. It bridged India's timeless spirituality with the urgent needs of her suffering masses. The Ramakrishna Mission, Organization and Spirit. In May 1897, even before Belur Math was established, Vivekananda had formally founded the Ramakrishna Mission. Its stated goals were twofold: for one's own liberation through spiritual practice, for the good of the world through service. The mission was to be non-sectarian, open to people of all castes and creeds. It embraced schools, hospitals, orphanages, and relief programs. But beyond institutions, it emphasized a spirit of work, selfless service free from ego, seeing the divine in all. Vivekananda used to tell his disciples, "Do not seek God in temples alone. He is there in the poor, in the sick, in the ignorant. Where else should we go to worship Him?" Service in action. The late 1890s brought devastating famines and plagues to India. Vivekananda immediately mobilized his monks to serve. They opened relief camps, distributed food, treated the sick, and consoled the dying. At a time when caste barriers were rigid, these young monks fearlessly touched and served people of every background. Their compassion became a living sermon of Vedanta. The people, astonished to see saffron-clad monks carrying medicine, cooking food, or nursing the sick, realized that religion could indeed take a new form, one that entered into the very heart of human suffering. Western disciples. Vivekananda's mission was not confined to India. His fiery words in the West had drawn several devoted disciples who now came to India to serve. Sister Nivedita, Margaret Noble, an Irish woman inspired by his call, dedicated her life to India. She worked for the education of girls, the uplift of women, and the awakening of national consciousness. Vivekananda called her his daughter in spirit. Captain Xavier and Mrs. Xavier, a devoted English couple, founded the Advaita Ashram in the Himalayas. Josephine MacLeod, another disciple, became a tireless advocate for spreading Vivekananda's ideas worldwide. Their presence added an international dimension to the Ramakrishna mission, proving that Vivekananda's ideals belonged not only to India but to the world.
Awakening women. Vivekananda strongly emphasized the role of women in India's revival. He declared, "There is no chance for the welfare of the world unless the condition of women is improved. It is impossible for a bird to fly on one wing." Through Sister Nivedita and other initiatives, he inspired efforts for women's education and empowerment. He saw in women the embodiment of strength, purity and sacrifice, the very qualities that India needed for her regeneration. A guide to the youth. More than anyone else, Vivekananda touched the hearts of India's youth. His words, "Arise, awake and stop not till the goal is reached," resounded in classrooms, hostels and gatherings. He gave them an ideal larger than personal success, the ideal of service, strength and sacrifice for the motherland. To young minds shackled by colonial inferiority, he gave the gift of self-confidence. Leaders of the next generation, Mahatma Gandhi, Subhash Chandra Bose and others acknowledged their debt to him. Gandhi said, "Swami Vivekananda's writings need no introduction from anybody. They make their own irresistible appeal." Vivekananda the builder. Though a monk, Vivekananda was also a builder. He laid the foundation for schools, hospitals and ashramas across India. He encouraged his disciples to start centers of service in different provinces, planting seeds that would grow into a vast network. But he also cautioned them, "Remember, it is not the number of centers or the size of buildings that matters. It is the spirit of renunciation and service that is everything."
Inner struggles. Behind his tireless activity, Vivekananda bore immense personal strain. His health, already fragile, suffered under the weight of work. Yet he refused to rest. He often told his disciples, "I cannot stop. I have work to do. I shall not cease till I have planted the seed." He also wrestled with the burden of leadership. At times, he longed for the peace of meditation in the Himalayas. But duty called him back again and again to the field of service. In private letters, he revealed moments of loneliness and pain. But he always ended them with renewed strength, reminding his followers that the mission was not his but his master's. A lasting legacy. By the close of the 1890s, the Ramakrishna mission had become a living force in India. Its blend of spirituality and service, its harmony of East and West, and its emphasis on strength and compassion marked a new chapter in India's history. Vivekananda knew his own life might be short, but he was content, for the seed had been sown. As he told his disciples, "It may be that I shall not live to see it, but it is bound to grow. The future belongs to our work." The builder of modern India. Thus, in a span of just a few years, Vivekananda had transformed the vision of a single master into a movement that spanned continents. He had given India not only a sense of pride but also a plan for action. The monk who had once wandered as a penniless pilgrim was now the builder of institutions, the inspirer of youth, and the prophet of a new age. The foundation had been laid, the mission was alive, the work of centuries had begun.
Chapter 12. The Final Years, Fading Health and Unyielding Spirit. By the turn of the century, Swami Vivekananda was barely in his late 30s, yet his body bore the strain of a lifetime of toil. He had travelled tirelessly across continents, delivered thousands of lectures, organized the Ramakrishna mission, and inspired millions. The world saw him as a spiritual giant, but within he was a man carrying immense physical pain. A body under strain. From his youth, Vivekananda's constitution had been delicate. Years of wandering as a penniless monk, exposure to harsh climates, and unceasing labor had only worsened his health. By 1900, he suffered from asthma, diabetes, insomnia, and chronic headaches. At times, even walking became difficult. Yet, when his body faltered, his spirit soared higher. He used to say with a smile,
This body is only a rented house. Let it break down. I am not it. My work is the Master's, and I shall finish it before I go. The second visit to the West. Despite his frailty, in 1899 he undertook a second journey to the West, this time accompanied by fellow monks. He traveled to New York, San Francisco, and Paris, continuing to spread Vedanta. Everywhere he went, disciples flocked to hear his profound yet practical message. In Paris, he participated in the Congress of Religions, where once again his scholarship and vision won admiration. In America, he founded Vedanta societies, institutions that would carry his teachings forward long after he was gone. But the travel took a heavy toll on his health. By 1900, he was exhausted and longed to return to India. He wrote to friends, "The sand has nearly run out. I am only waiting for Mother's command to return." Return to Belur Math. In December 1900, he returned to Belur Math. His disciples were overjoyed, yet they were alarmed at his weakened condition. Still, his presence radiated a quiet power. He spent long hours in meditation by the Ganga, often gazing silently at the flowing waters as if communing with eternity. At the Math, he guided the younger monks with fatherly care. He trained them not only in meditation and scriptures, but also in discipline, humility, and service. Remember, he told them, our work is not to build a new sect, but to awaken the divinity in man. Keep the Master's ideal alive. Spiritual depths. In his final years, Vivekanand's inner life deepened. He spoke less, but when he did, his words carried the weight of lived truth. He often reminded his disciples that renunciation and service were the twin pillars of true spirituality. Sometimes he would retreat into silence, absorbed in meditation. At other times, he would burst into song, chanting hymns to Kali, his chosen deity, with tears streaming down his face. To those around him, he seemed to be preparing for a higher journey. The teacher's wisdom. Even in his frailty, he continued to teach. He emphasized strength of character. It is character that pays everywhere. Nothing else will work. Faith in oneself. The moment you doubt you are divine, you are undone. Believe in yourself. Service to humanity. So long as the millions live in hunger and ignorance, I hold every man a traitor who does not feel for them. These sayings, simple yet profound, became the guiding lights for generations to come. Hints of departure. By 1902, Vivekananda seemed to sense that his time was near. He spoke often of death, not with fear, but with serenity. He would tell his disciples, I shall not live to be 40. I have done my work. Now let me rest. They protested, but he only smiled. He believed his task had been to plant the seed, not to see the full harvest. The work will go on. The Lord is with it, he assured them. The last day. On July 4, 1902, the American Independence Day, Vivekananda rose early at Belur Math. The day was unusually peaceful. He meditated deeply for hours, then taught Sanskrit grammar to some young monks, showing his characteristic blend of scholarship and discipline. Later, he walked in the Math grounds, speaking affectionately to his disciples. At noon, he shared a simple meal with them. In the afternoon, he retired to his room, saying he wished to meditate. As the sun set over the Ganga, he entered deep meditation, seated on his bed. Hours passed in silence. When his disciples gently entered the room, they found him still, his body upright, his face calm, a faint smile upon his lips. Swami Vivekananda had entered Mahasamadhi, the great transcendence. He was only 39 years old. The nation mourns. The news spread like wildfire. India was stunned. The fiery monk who had awakened her pride and strength was gone. Newspapers across the world paid tribute to him. One wrote, "In Swami Vivekananda, the world loses one of its noblest souls, India, one of her greatest sons." Yet his disciples and admirers knew that though his body had fallen, his spirit had become immortal. The seed he had sown in a short span of time would grow into a mighty tree, sheltering generations. The eternal flame. In the decades to come, his teachings would inspire leaders of India's freedom struggle, thinkers, educators, and youth movements across the world. The Ramakrishna mission, true to his vision, would expand into schools, hospitals, and centers of service worldwide. His life had been brief, but it burned like a comet, brilliant, intense, unforgettable. He had given to India her self-confidence, to the world her spiritual message, and to humanity a vision of harmony. As Rabindranath Tagore said, "If you want to know India, study Vivekananda. In him, everything is positive, nothing negative."
Beyond death. For his followers, Vivekananda did not die. He had merely passed into a higher existence. His voice still echoes. Arise, awake, and stop not till the goal is reached. The youth of every generation hear that call anew, and through them his spirit continues to march forward. Conclusion: The legacy of a lion. From his birth in Calcutta in 1863 to his Mahasamadhi in 1902, Swami Vivekananda lived less than 40 years. Yet in that brief span, he shook the world. He carried India's wisdom to the West, brought self-respect to a conquered nation, and founded a mission that serves humanity to this day. His life was a song of renunciation, service, strength, and love. He proved that true religion is not escape from life, but the transformation of life. And though the Ganga still flows silently past Belur-Math, one can almost hear in its murmuring waters the eternal cry of the lion monk. Strength, strength, strength. You were listening. Awake, Arise, The Life of Swami Vivekananda. Written, narrated, and published by SweetAudible. Thank you.